Doug, would you describe yourself as America first?
America first, what? Like, so if I'm watching, if I'm watching an Olympic competition, yeah,
I want the gold medal.
I want the American to win the gold medal, and not the fellow from some other country.
Yeah.
So yeah, America first, there, right? And that's the kind of thing where I think it's totally legitimate to be America first. Where it's not jingoistic, it's not xenophobic, because I want America to win, right? But if some Brit wins that event, and he's a Christian and he's giving glory to God for the win, I can appreciate I can understand why he's celebrating and enjoy his celebration, right? Because he's doing the same thing, only with a different country, right? So, saying, "Do you believe in America first?" It's like saying, "Do you think you should put your mom first?"
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and other men ought to put their mom first. My mom is first. Why? Because she's my mom. So you don't want two men in a card aisle at the grocery store getting into a fight because one of them tried to buy a card that says "to the world's best mom." And the other guy says, "You don't have the world's best mom. I've got the world's best mom."
Right.
Well, that's a stupid
Yeah.
argument. So a man, and this is something we had to address in the early days of the classical Christian school movement because of teaching Latin and the glories of Western civilization, etc. And my response to people who objected at the time, they said multiculturalism was the term. Now it's diversity, equity, the language changes, but they said multiculturalism is the way. And I said, you can't teach children to honor and respect other people's traditions by teaching them to despise their own.
Right.
A man who loves and honors his mom is going to fully understand why another man loves and honors his mom. A patriot is going to love his country and not begrudge someone else who loves his country, right? Someone who's xenophobic, someone who is, America first gone wrong,
right,
is seeing patriotism as a zero-sum game. Anybody who's loving their country or their tradition or their language or that's a threat to me, right? So I'm against that kind of hostility or that kind of bitter partisanship. But I think all Americans should love their country. And I think that when it comes to foreign policy, I think our president should operate with America's best interests in mind. That should be his metric. That should be his calculus. Immigration policy the same way. Is this good for America? Right, and certain levels of immigration would absolutely be good for America, and certain levels are disastrous. And if an American president said, "I want to do what's best for these Guatemalan immigrants, Guatemalan immigrants first," then he's guilty of dereliction of duty. That's not his task.
So that just old-fashioned patriotism that you're describing, that common sense love of our place, is something that has been for the last decade or so turned into a vice.
Right.
Has been portrayed as a vice, something we're supposed to be embarrassed of.
Right.
So we've defiantly continued to celebrate our patriotism, our love of America first.
Right.
But that it's really easy for that kind of defiant celebration of America first to turn into that jingoism that you're describing.
Something that's toxic.
Yeah.
So I understand. I loved it, for example, when our vice president responded to the reporter about this guy in the country with, "I really don't care, Margaret."
Right.
Okay. So that was glorious. That was the chef's kiss response. That was exactly right. But then I see a bunch of people making memes out of this, saying, I really don't care, Margaret, about things that any Christian should really care about.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have let's say you've got a refugee column coming toward the States, and you're closing the border. Oswald Chambers once said a wonderful line. He said, "The need is not the call. The need is not the call." In a world full of sorrow and sin and brokenness, with all of us finite, there is only a certain amount of good that I can do. And I should focus on the good I'm required to do, and that God is going to hold me accountable for. A man who doesn't take care of his own household is worse than an unbeliever, Paul says. If he's charging around manning soup kitchens and feeding the poor and doing all this and neglecting his own family, he's going to be judged negatively for that. So the fact that, let's say in this Guatemalan refugee column, let's say that there are some true humanitarian disaster stories. I mean, real disaster stories, and a sad ending, and you know, it's just bad. The illustration I use with this is, let's say you've got a family, two of their own kids, and they decide to take in 2 foster kids, and they take them in, and it's a good and godly, healthy family, and everybody's thriving. The foster kids are thriving. Their biological children are thriving. They're thinking about adopting the foster kids. Everything's going smoothly. And then one day a bus from Human Services shows up with 28 new foster kids, and then deposits those foster kids on, here you go, 28 new ones. The father, if he's debating with them, can justly say, I believe we were doing a good job, loving job with our own biological children. We thought we could expand that, and I think we were doing a really good job with these foster kids, loving them. But what you've just done to us is you're going to put us in a situation where we're not going to do any good to anybody.
Right.
We're just going to make a mess with 32 kids. That's what you've imposed on us. And the fact that we live in a time when camera crews can descend upon the place of a humanitarian disaster and say, and then take the footage up to some suburban. Aren't you selfish and evil and awful because you won't take them in? Well, why don't I? There's a lot of hungry people in the world. Why don't I write a check?
Yeah.
Because I don't have the money. I'm finite.
Yeah.
And I'm finite, and I'm a finite person with certain assigned responsibilities.
Yeah.
Right? And among those responsibilities for Americans who live in a wealthy country is to be, 1 Timothy 6, is we need to be generous and willing to share. We need to be overflowing and giving to others, not set our hope on riches. All of that is true. But the progressive left is using compassion as a battering ram to destroy individual fathers and mothers and citizens from being able to do their duty to their own people.